Hello there, Twitch. Hello there, YouTube. And we are also on TikTok and Discord. Welcome, everyone. I hope you are all well. Have you all had water, taken your meds, eaten something, and said something kind about yourself today? I hope you have, because the world is a shit show, and the only thing that we can do not to drown is be in community. And so we are reading today, the last reading of the week. We are reading Abolition, Feminism Now by Angela Davis, Gina Dent, Erica Mayners, and Beth Richie. And this collective of incredible abolition feminists have created a masterpiece here. The last reading of the week. And I knew that was going to happen, and I'm a silly goose. Because my OBS decided to go all wonky. Apparently UAE tweeted they're going to invade the island of Strait of Hormuz. Okay. Why would they announce that? As I said in the server, just call it the Gay of Hormuz instead of the Strait of Hormuz, and then the USA will leave it alone. Or we can hope. So today, I had an interview, a very interesting interview. I interviewed somebody named Kifaya Khrem, who is from an organization that essentially documents survivor testimonies from administrative detention in Israeli prisons. And these are Palestinians who are suffering under Israeli detention, and she told me the most horrific stories. It was heartbreaking, to say the least. Let's put it this way. If any brown country had done what Israel is doing, it would have been bombed to shit. So yeah, you will hear that on Patreon in a couple of days' time. So we are reading Abolition, Feminism Now. Whenever a person in support of colonial terror, like the terror that Israel is perpetuating against Palestinians, you'll say, oh, we need to save the woman. And that, I'm not going to do the whole no true Scotsman fallacy here, because that is feminism. That is the root of feminism. It is what feminism was created around, the rights of white women and colonial powers over colonized people. And our feminism has to be decolonial, if it is feminism at all. And so we get into the book, page 94, if you're following along, the next section of the second chapter on feminism, called Radical Beginnings, again. And last week, what we dealt with was the movement called Insight, and the energy and the hope that Insight brought people with their conferences and grassroots organizing. Now, grassroots organizing is one of the many ways in which we can help our communities. And of course, it is one of the most direct ways that we can help our communities. However, one movement cannot change everything. And we saw this with how Insight's politics kind of differed from some of the goals of the people who belong to the organization, as well as a sense of not really belonging for some people. But yeah, that's what we went over last week, so we get to radical beginnings again. We situate insight within a genealogy of abolition feminism because it signals how radical feminists of color have historically troubled gender essentialism, forging over time a collective political consciousness of gender violence, as always also shaped by racism, class bias, transphobia, heterosexism, and so on. Basically, understanding the systems at play instead of the individual violence against other individuals. This genealogy resists mainstream histories of anti-violence movements that continue to center whiteness and carceral responses. Yeah. While it is true that a major catalyst for the late 1960s women's movement was the recognition of the ubiquity of physical and sexual abuse of women within circles that had previously demanded silence, there is a long history of work against sexual abuse and gender violence, more broadly linked to what we now recognize as Black feminist activism. The fact that the US anti-violence movement is often conventionally periodized in connection with the 1966 founding of the National Organization for Women, or NOW, and the later creation of the NOW Task Force on Rape, erases signal contributions of women of color. And this has always been the case in feminist movements. It has always been the case where people were targeted saying, we cannot deal with race because we are trying to fight gender violence, not realizing that you cannot fight gender violence without acknowledging that race is an integral part of it. While gender violence has always crossed borders of race and class, the speak-outs and consciousness-raising sessions, the strategy of encouraging women to publicly reveal violence within intimate relationships that they had previously kept secret, that attempted to break the silence regarding rape and domestic violence, were primarily associated with white feminism. To be sure, these teachings, speak-outs, and consciousness-raising sessions were radical political acts, but women of color, white working-class women, and others with more expansive political consciousness insisted on making important linkages to anti-racism, reproductive justice, anti-imperialist campaigns, labor movements, and other social justice struggles. For example, radical white women activists who were part of Santa Cruz Women Against Rape released the 1977 Letter to the Anti-Rape Movement, which stated that racist and sexist criminal legal systems make the problem of rape even worse. Even the term women of color, popularized during that era, signified the political formation of a radical feminist alliance among women who shared oppression from a range of structural forces in addition to heteropatriarchy, including the generalized criminalization of their communities. And we cannot ignore the fact that white feminism ignores and throws women of color under the bus. And the fact that it is still seen as women of color instead of women, femmes, and gender diverse people, especially by white feminist movements, it shows that there is a whole lot of other exclusionary practices at play. Without underestimating the eventual emergence of a strong anti-rape and anti-violence movement, an abolition feminist lens troubles conventional histories that too frequently still center white women and mainstream organizations. And as we saw in the last section, mainstream organizations tend to co-opt the language of radical movements and just say centering care, which is an essential part of what civil society should do and what government should do, caring for the people, and making it a carceral issue, that care requires incarceration because we're doing it for their own good. We're doing it for the community's own good. No, you're taking people away from the community into the carceral system where you should actually be providing healthcare services, where you should be providing mental health services, where you should be providing education, where you should be providing housing. The group Sisters Testify is a storytelling project dedicated to ensuring that Black women's resistance to sexual abuse is not lost in the historical accounts of anti-violence movement organizing. Sisters Testify is focused on lifting up the work that Barbara Ransby, Deborah King, and Elsa Barkley Brown led in response to the sexual harassment and legal mistreatment of Anita Hill by the soon-to-be-appointed U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. African American Women in Defense of Ourselves was formed in 1991 after 1,600 Black women and our allies signed a letter that appeared in the New York Times expressing, quote, the particular outrageous racist and sexist treatment of Professor Anita Hill, unquote, and that, quote, the malicious defamation of Professor Hill insulted all women of African descent and sent a dangerous message to any woman who might contemplate a sexual harassment complaint, unquote. Sisters Testify is one of many projects attempting to more fully describe the genealogy of abolition feminism by keeping the story of a widow alive. A widow is in reference to the African American Woman in Defense of Ourselves. These erasures continue. Okay, I'll get to that in a second. Racist tropes and racist talking points have always been used by whiteness to discredit not only survivors of color, but Black men in positions of power. Yes, Clarence Thomas is a piece of shit. He is not a piece of shit because he's Black. He is a piece of shit because he's a man and he sexually assaulted someone. Because we believe Professor Anita Hill. But the narrative that whiteness created was Clarence Thomas was unfit for the job because he was a Black man who assaulted someone. But then again, the same people turned around to Professor Hill saying the most heinous things about her as a Black woman. That she couldn't keep her legs closed. That, Black women are like this. The things that I heard during that time, I was so young, but I remember some of the things that were said because it was such a big deal that Clarence Thomas was being appointed to the Supreme Court. Yay! That makes having farm Wi-Fi better. I thought, oh my goodness. Do I smell or something? The viewership just dropped, like drastically. You got man juice? I fucking adore you. And so the erasure of these stories is rooted in anti-Blackness. The whiteness at play in feminism means that both perpetrator and survivor are demonized. Hey. These erasures continue. Alyssa Milano, a white actor, was initially credited with the creation of Me Too to emphasize the pandemic dimensions on sexual violence in 2017, even though Black feminist Tarana Burke had first used the hashtag in 2006. Many contemporary images associated with Me Too, Time's Up, and the campus-based Title IX initiatives are still overwhelmingly white. reflecting the institutionalized response to sexual violence that are aligned with carceral feminism. And it's important to understand that whiteness is aligned with carceral feminism because whiteness is protected by carceral institutions. In this context, we might ask why the important work against rape and sexual violence within the US Southern Black Freedom Movement was so marginalized that only after many years of research and activism did we come to recognize, for example, Rosa Parks as a forerunner of the anti-rape activists in the late 1960s. Parks, Esther Cooper Jackson, and Braden and others linked anti-rape strategies to campaigns against the racist use of rape charges in the cases of the Scottsboro Nine, between 1931 and 1937, Willie McGee, 1945 to 51, and the 1955 murder of Emmett Till, who was accused of making sexual comments to a white woman. As many scholars and activists have observed, the struggle to defend black men from fraudulent rape charges was directly linked to the defense of black women who were targets of rape, like Recy Taylor. Rape and racist manipulation of the rape charge were fundamentally connected. Much of the early work of black feminism and radical women of color feminism consisted of attempts to correct the historical record, pointing out that white women were not the only women who challenged misogyny and patriarchy, and that women of color engaged in these challenges in more complex, intersectional ways. And it doesn't mean that women of color are doing better work, because yes, some white women are doing the work. It means that the majority of white women are not doing it for everyone. If we acknowledge the history of contemporary calls for abolition feminism raised by the Moment of Truth statement and related activist efforts from groups like Love and Protect, API, Chi, and Just Practice, that can be traced back to 19th century attempts by abolitionists to link anti-slavery strategies to women's suffrage and other feminist projects, then a critical genealogy of abolition feminism cannot exclude the lineage that proceeds from the important work against gender violence linked to movements against racist repression during the McCarthy era. Eee, my brother. Because this work has been subject to erasure or misinterpretation, only recently have scholars conducted the research that has rendered visible important contributions by major forerunners of black feminism during the 1940s and 50s. And this insertion of black names in history books is not enough. We have to know context. We have to understand the systems at play in order to fully understand that women of color are facing the double bind, triple bind of racist white feminism and patriarchy all at once. We often begin the story of 20th century black feminism and intersectionality as a feminist methodology with Fran Beale's 1969 germinal pamphlet, Double Jeopardy, To Be Black and Female, which I will download at the end of the reading and put it in my server, which was republished in 1970 in Toni Cade Bambara's anthology, The Black Woman, as well as Robin Morgan's 1970 edited collection, Sisterhood is Powerful. However, more than 20 years before Double Jeopardy, the Trinidadian communist Claudia Jones wrote an extended article entitled To End the Neglect of Problems of the Negro Woman, in which she argued that black women were subject to super exploitation. Moreover, she insisted that the occupation of the domestic worker, to which the majority of black women were relegated during the decades following slavery, was associated with the very dangers that black women had experienced during slavery, such as rape, sexual abuse, and harassment more broadly. Claudia Jones clearly understood the structural nature of sexual violence. And that is exactly it. It's when people refuse to understand the structure is when you have a problem. We have to understand the structural system at play. If Claudia Jones's use of the terms superexploitation points to an implicit understanding both of racial capitalism and the impact of patriarchy, this reduction of the Marxist critique of political economy was embraced by larger communities of radical black women activists who also understood the implications of the primary occupation open to black women. Esther Cooper Jackson, a leading figure in the Southern Negro Youth Congress in the 1940s and the founding editor of Freedom Ways, wrote her 1940s master's thesis on the Negro domestic worker in relation to trade unionism. I need to find that one. Long before Ella Baker emerged as a leading figure in the mid-20th century Black Freedom movement, she was an organizer for the NAACP, and in 1935 she and Marvel Cook wrote an article for the magazine The Crisis entitled Bronx Slave Market. The gatherings of black women on the city street corners seeking work as domestics were known as slave markets, not because of the exceedingly low wages than to wage labor. Despite the prevailing euphemistic description of sexual abuse, all of these activities were clearly aware of the harassment and sexual violence as a routine hazard of the occupation. When I first spoke to somebody who was doing their thesis on sexual violence in domestic labor, which she never finished due to illness, unfortunately, she said two things that really grabbed my attention, and this was a long time ago. She said, firstly, white women knew exactly how badly slaves were treated if they described being a woman, a white woman, under patriarchy as slavery, as gender slavery. And secondly, she, towards the end of the conversation, she just shook her head and said, "Why can't white men keep their grubby fucking paws off us if we are so despicable?" And I said, it's not about anything sexual, it's about ownership. And that's when she's like, oh, right. Ownership. It's colonizing the land, colonizing the body, and colonizing the mind. To have their cake and eat it too? Yep. You know, I'm on Goethe, who was a Nazi in Poland, kept a woman named Helen Hirsch. Well, she was a girl at the time. She was younger than 16. Helen Hirsch was his personal servant, a Jewish woman, and he fell in love with her. He used to beat her because he hated her in the way that he hated the fact that he loved her. Still a fucking monstrous pedophile, though. Like, fuck that guy. Got what he deserved. Any questions so far? All right. Just a quick ad break. The Palestine Solidarity Campaign needs your support. A quick reminder as we close out the month, please dig deep and spare a few pennies if you can fund the important work that must be done in the fight for humanity against imperialism, against genocide, and against the occupation. Contributions cover the ongoing solidarity work, printing, transport, all out of pocket from volunteers. Our 5,000 monthly fee to the South African BDS Coalition, which drives the broader campaign to end the occupation. And remember that we run on solidarity, not sponsorship. So whatever you can spare, and there are bank details. If you want to donate anything to that, please get in touch with me and I will tell you how. Yeah. If you can, please, please, please. So yeah, let's get back to it. In an interview quoted in Baker and Cook's article, one woman indicated that she left her job not only because of the drudgery of the work, but also because of one of the family's adult sons who had so-called hand trouble. Oh. Like Esther Cooper Jackson, Baker and Cook also emphasized the central importance of organizing domestic worker unions. And it would take years after that to actually organize a domestic workers union, but unions are scarce where people of color are involved. Despite the whitewashing of the history of anti-violence organizing across decades and the tendency to ignore racism within the anti-violence movement at different points in time, women of color continue to organize against gender and sexual violence. Yes?
Will you eat butter chicken tomorrow?
I will. Thank you. I would rather have hot cross bun.
Tomorrow, I'm talking about.
Oh. Yeah. I love you.
Your answer confuses me.
What?
Your answer confuses me.
Why?
Do you want butter chicken tomorrow or not?
Yes. It's the Hobbit. Oh, just a reminder, I do this work for free, so if you can, accept GB. In 1980, the first national conference on Third World Women and Violence in Washington, D.C., led by early abolition feminists like Loretta Ross and Ngeke Ture, groups like San Francisco Women Against Rape, the New York Asian Women's Center, the National Black Feminist Organization, and the Women of Color Caucus of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence were beginning to stake their rightful place in the landscape of anti-violence organizing. These networks built on the organizing of groups like Women of All Red Nations, which in 1974 began to address a range of issues central to the lives of Indigenous women, including but not limited to interpersonal violence. And these sort of organizing committees, these sort of groups, yes, it may seem like it fragments solidarity movements, but this is how solidarity is actually formed. When you have groups that have a central theme of one aspect of the organizing coming together as a coalition. Just like as I spoke about the Palestine Solidarity Committee, I'm part of BDS, which is the parent organization. BDS, Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions, is a coalition of lots of other small movements for Palestinian liberation, including another organization that I'm part of called Queers for Palestine. So we take on all of the work regarding queer issues in Palestine, while the PSA is more majority in terms of educating about Islam in the Middle East. And the PSC organizes the actual physical campaigns that happen. So every single group like this forms a larger part of a movement. So these are organizations, and they are part of a movement. And the movement is abolition, feminism, and anti-violence. Specifically, led by women of color. These networks built on These organizations' actions were dynamic, political and cultural, expansive and aspirational, fundamentally abolitionist, and centered a transnational and post-colonial feminism. Literary and arts organizations circulated the political analysis of women of color feminisms. Kitchen Table Press, very good, published key anthologies like Sheri Moraga and Gloria Anzaldua's The Bridge Called My Back, and Barbara Smith's Homegirls, Sweet Honey in the Rock, led by one of the original Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee Freedom Singers, Bernice Johnson Reagon, provided a musical background to movement organizing. The climate of this era, ripe... Thank you so much. So much, darling. The climate of this era, ripe with hope, sprinkled with joy, was foundational to the kind of organization Insight aspired to be, one that was not engaged in the misery of reforming dominant organizations. And all of us have been there, right? Hey, we can reform this. Hey, we can fix this. We can fix it. No. There comes a point where you realize this can't be fixed. This can never be fixed. Reform is not going to work when the root of it is rotten. You can't just prune a few branches when the root is rotten to the core, when the soil in which the tree is planted is poisoned. Instead, this example of abolition feminism at work consisted of a network of activists bound together by a vision of what the world could be, grounded in a shared history of righteous early organizing. After years of feeling disheartened and betrayed by mainstream anti-violence activism, founding members and those now working alongside them desired to return to these vibrant earlier moments when radical anti-violence work embraced the celebration of our relationships and accomplishment and was driven by a passion for justice. The commitment to build on that legacy, working for freedom instead of merely working against danger and despair, was an important element of abolition feminist organizing. And that is why I always say, where is the action? Where's the joy? Where is the positivity in how we organize? Are we fighting against something, or are we fighting for something? And if we are fighting for something, what is it we're fighting for? Within these coalitions, currently and formerly incarcerated women, many of whom were survivors of gender violence, mobilized to redefine safety and increasingly began to fight for abolition. In 1985, the first public hearing on battered women and the criminal justice system was held at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, a maximum security women's prison in New York, where incarcerated women centered the links between criminalization and gender violence. Organized by women who were incarcerated and their anti-violence advocates were on the outside, the 12 testimonies firmly established gender violence as a pathway to women's imprisonment. Sorry. I have to do this. How is everybody? Welcome in. These hearings illuminated the profound and persistent ways that gender violence, including intimate partner violence and state violence, intersected, contributing to the incarceration rates of both women and the people who hurt them. Consistently, incarcerated women who are not named in the report for safety testified that police failed to offer solutions. Quote, "I felt that they were giving my husband consent to come back and beat me some more after they left. And he did." Unquote. These testimonies led, unfortunately, to a set of recommendations in the final report that enhanced the criminal legal response to gender violence. More police training, harsher penalties, in part because they ignored the context of state violence. Ignoring the fact that the carceral system is an arm of the state and the state is racist, doesn't help anyone. That is, while the report attempted to center the experiences and analysis of criminalized survivors, its narrow analytical frame stands as an example of why abolition feminism is so important. Centering the experiences and analyses of people in prison and the linkages between state and interpersonal violence, this organizing at Bedford built on earlier work, including self-defense and freedom organizing campaigns for incarcerated women, such as the 1974 Free Joan Little movement and the emergence of 1970s group such as Aid to Incarcerated Mothers, Prison Match, or Prison Mothers and Their Children, and other convenings such as the 1977 Action Conference of Women Against Repression and Prison, which gathered 120 participants, most of whom were formerly incarcerated women, and others who were representative of prison justice organizing. This work seeded the ground for the emergency of a wide array of groups led by currently or formerly incarcerated people, including the National Network for Women in Prison, Justice Now, Chicago's Legal Advocacy for Incarcerated Mothers, the Women's Prison Association, and later, the California Coalition for Women in Prison, Women on the Rise Telling Her Story, the Transgender, Gender Variant and Intersex Justice Project, and Moms United Against Violence and Incarceration. 1 second. Hi.
Make your tea.
What?
Did you make your tea?
I did not. I came straight into the reading. May I have a hot cross bun, please?
No.
Thank you. Concurrently, networks grew centering both an abolitionist framework and the experience of criminalized survivors, including Black and Pink, Survived and Punished, and the Sylvia Rivera Law Project. Increasingly, abolition feminist in practice and orientation, most of these survivor-led groups continue to work inside and outside of prisons and jails to center racial justice, construe carcerality broadly, including the violence inherent to social service and child welfare organizations, and challenge racial capitalism and the false solutions made available by the prison industrial complex. And that is where we will stop for today. Any questions? As always, I do these readings for free, so please, if you can, knock out that goal there, or the gift goal, or whatever the case may be. I wasn't even walking, and apparently I reached my goal. This watch is weird. So yeah, if you have any questions in the chat for Twitch and YouTube too late because I have to close up now on this side. So I shall see y'all on Tuesday. And on Tuesday, we are back to reading The Architecture of Modern Empire. So enjoy Twitch and YouTube. I shall see y'all soon.